Hey guys, welcome back for another Unraid video. A few years ago, Spaceinvader One brought us his original video about how to set up a virtual VPN router using the Openvpn protocol with private internet access as the provider. Then recently I brought you my video on how to take that same virtual router and set it up for NordVPN. Today we're going to take it one step further and set up an updated Ubuntu server with a virtual VPN router using Wireguard. We'll be starting from scratch and taking it step by step. If that sounds like something you're interested in, then stick around. Let's get started. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is go to ubuntu.com/download/server, and I'll put a link for that down below in the description. Once you get here, we want to go for option 2, manual server installation. Then you can do download Ubuntu server right here. Now, if you have your Unraid server mapped onto your desktop, you can go ahead and go straight to your download folder there, or you can just save it to your desktop and move it over afterwards. Now, if you're just using the default location on the Unraid server, chances are you should have a share already created called ISOs. If you don't, you can go ahead and create that share. Just use new folder or go into your Unraid dashboard and create that. So if you haven't changed the default location, go ahead and click on ISOs, and then I have mine organized just a little bit for all the ISO files that I have, but I've changed my default location to an unassigned disk. So I'm going to come down here to UAD share, and then I'm going to go to VMs. And there I've got my domains, my ISOs, my libvirt image. So I'm going to go to ISOs, and I'm going to go to Linux. And I've actually already got a copy of this saved in here, right here. So once you find the spot where you want to save your ISO, go ahead and hit save and let that download. And then we'll meet back on our Unraid dashboard. Okay, now here back on Unraid, I'm on the VMs tab. And I'm going to go ahead and add a VM. Now, one thing I like to do on the description, especially for these headless machines, I like to go ahead and add the IP address that I plan on assigning from my local network to the description. So I've used .135 already, .136. So this next one I'm going to add is going to be .137. That way later on, if I need to SSH back into it, I can remember what the static IP address is that I assigned. So let's do add VM, and then we're going to use the Ubuntu, and I'm going to change the icon. The main reason I like to do this is just to assign something that stands out. It doesn't even necessarily have to match the image that you're using. It's just something that catches your eye later on if you want to go back to. Otherwise, if you have a bunch of them that all share the same icon, it can be confusing. So I'm just going to pick something kind of randomly here that will stand out. I'm going to go with Arch. Obviously, this is not an Arch VM, but it's just an icon that will catch my eye later on. So you can name this whatever you'd like. I'm going to call this Ubuntu Video, and then the description I'm going to do 192.168.1.137. As for the CPU, the minimum that an Ubuntu server needs is 1 gigahertz. For most of my use cases on these Ubuntu images, they're fairly lightweight. I usually like to assign about 25% or 1/4 of my CPU power. I don't want them to get bogged down, but I don't need an excessive amount of wasted CPU power here. Minimum memory requirements is 0.5 gig for Ubuntu server. I'm going to go ahead and give it about 4 gigs. Again, use this at your discretion, but the minimum is 512 megs. The machine, we can leave this as default. We can leave this OVMF. And here is where we need to select our ISO image right here. If you remember, that's the one that we just saved a moment ago. So it should be filled already with your default path. If you saved that in a different spot, obviously manually type the path in here. But if you'll remember, I saved mine in Linux. And here is the 20.04.2 live server ISO. So I'm going to select that. I have found that 8 gigs is really the best minimum size. It's not the stated minimum requirement from Linux, but 8 gigs seems to be the sweet spot for this. We're not going to mount an Unraid share or an Unraid tag. Everything else can pretty much just be left the way it is. So let's go ahead and hit create, and we'll let that run. Okay, now that that's initialized, you should have a VNC screen that pops up. If you don't, right-click on the icon for the VM that you just created and go to VNC. Once you get to this screen, it's fairly basic. We're just going to go English. For me, I'm just going to leave this default. Obviously, if you're in a different locale, adjust as necessary. Done there. So right now, we can see here that the IP address is 192.168.1.43. We're going to change that later. But for now, we're just going to hit done. I don't have a proxy. We can leave that the way it is. And we want to use an entire disk. Scroll down and hit done. And hit done. Are you sure you want to continue? Yes. Your name, I'm going to call it Chaz. Your server's name, I'm just going to call the server Wireguard. Username, Chaz. Password. Okay, and done. We definitely want to install OpenSSH server. So let's hit the space bar there. We don't need to worry about importing an identity. Scroll down and hit done. And feel free to install any of these options that you want. I'm not going to need any for the purposes of this video, so I'm going to skip all those. Scroll down, hit done, and we'll let that run. This can take a little while, so I will fast forward through this and catch you on the other side. Alright, once the install is complete, scroll down to reboot now. If you get these failed unmounting CD-ROM errors, don't worry about it. Just hit enter again, and it'll run right through it. Okay, now that we're here, let's go ahead and log in with the username that you created earlier. Mine was Chaz. Password. Alright, and once all that is initialized, now that we're here on a fresh install, the first thing we want to do is clear the screen. You should be good to go on a fresh download, but let's go ahead and update the VM real quick. Sudo apt update. Alright, now we want to do sudo apt upgrade. Yes. Sometimes this can take a minute. I'll catch you on the other side of this. Alright, now that we've got that done, let's go ahead and clear our screen again. And we're ready to begin our setup. So step 1, we need to check that Cloud Init is disabled. So the first thing we're going to type here is cd /etc/cloud.cfg.d/ and then we're going to type ls. And you want to look for disable config, which is subiquity-disable-cloudinit-networking.cfg. So now we're gonna type sudo nano subiquity-disable-cloudinit networking.cfg. Then enter your password, and it is disabled. Depending on exactly what version of the Linux server you downloaded, this may come enabled, but we definitely want to make sure that it's disabled before we move on. If you did happen to have a config that had this enabled, all you have to do, if it says enabled, is just backspace that and type disabled. Then you hit Control O and enter to save it, then Control X, and that's gonna save it for us. And now let's type clear again. Then we want to do CD and tilde, and we can clear the screen. Now we're ready to check the interface. So let's go ahead and type IP link. And right there at item number 2, you can see where on my screen it says ENP1S0. So remember that, because that's going to be the interface that we use throughout the rest of this video. So in my case, I'm going to be using ENP1S0. In your case, it might say ENP2S0 or ENP3S0. So throughout the rest of the video, anytime that I'm using ENP1S0, you're going to use what yours says right here. Typically it should say ENP1S0, but it may not. If it doesn't, that's okay. You just need to remember if it's different. So let's clear that. The next thing is we need to navigate to our Netplan folder. So let's type cd etc/netplan. Now let's list the files in there. Excellent. Now we're going to type sudo nano 00 -installer. Installer config.yaml. Yours may vary just slightly, but the .yaml is what we want to edit. Now we need to make a handful of changes here, and the spacing for this configuration file can be kind of tricky. If you don't get it just right, it's a little bit finicky, and when you go to save it, it may tell you that it failed to save, or it'll give you some sort of error message. So if you need to pause after I'm done making these changes and take a good look at what the screen looks like, feel free. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll make sure that I line up a letter above with the letter below to make sure that I got the spacing right on the different lines. So the first thing that we're going to do here is on the DHCP4 line, we're going to change that to no. Then we're going to press enter, and it will not accept tab using the tab key either, so make sure you use the space bar when you switch over. And underneath DHCP4, I'm going to make sure I've got the A right below the D, and I'm going to type addresses colon, and then we're going to do our open bracket here, 192.168.1.137. If you can remember earlier, I in the VM description on the Unraid dashboard, where I said I like to type in the IP address that I plan on assigning it in the description, that's what this is. So on your network, you may have your DHCP range something like 10.1.0. whatever number you decide to assign it with. If that's the case, just modify yours accordingly. You can assign it any unoccupied IP address on your network. After you get that done, we're going to do /24, and then we're going to close that bracket. We're going to press enter, space, 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 get right under the A, and we're going to type gateway 4 colon space, and this is going to be the IP address of the router on your network. So in my case, it's 192.168.1.1. enter, space, space, space. Then we're gonna do name servers, colon, enter. And then we wanna start right under the first S. And we're gonna type addresses, colon. And you can enter any DNS IP address if you have a preference here. I'm gonna use Google and Cloudflare, so I'm gonna do open bracket, 8.8.8.8, apostrophe, or comma, and then I'm gonna do 1.1.1.1, and then close the bracket. And now we're ready to save it. So we're gonna do Control O on the keyboard. And if you need to pause, now's a great time. Pause it right here. Make sure you've got everything the way you need it to. And then come back. Be sure to save it, Control O, and then Control X. And then let's clear the screen again. Now we need to make sure that we save and apply those changes to our system. So let's type sudo netplan apply. Oops. Okay, and to verify that, let's type IP space A. And now on ENP1S0, if you look 2 lines below that, you'll see where it says inet 192.168.1.137, which means that now we are ready to SSH into this headless server instead of being stuck on this VNC viewer. So let's do that now. Now here we are on a fresh terminal window. If you're on Mac or Linux, you can use terminal, or if you're on Windows, you can use PuTTY. And the first thing we're gonna do here is SSH space, and then whatever username you set. If you'll remember, mine was Chaz at, and then the IP address 192.168.1.137, then press enter. Are you sure you want to continue connecting? Yes. And then the password, and this is the password to the server here, the virtual router. And now you can see we're logged in, Chaz at Wireguard, right here. So let's go ahead and clear that screen. Now our next step is to get our IP tables all set up. So let's type sudo apt get install IPTables persistent. Password. Yes. And then hit yes again. Yes again. Once we get that installed, we can go ahead and clear our screen again. Now it's time to install Wireguard. So we're gonna do sudo apt install Wireguard. Password. Yes. The next step is to install OpenResolve, and we'll use this to update our Resolve configuration file with the DNS from our Wireguard provider. So let's go ahead and type sudo apt install OpenResolve. Remember, there's no E on the end of that. Okay, let's go ahead and clear the screen again. Then we're going to enable IPv4 forwarding. So let's do sudo nano etc sysctl.conf, and we need to uncomment the line to enable the IP4 packet forwarding. Then we'll just save and exit. So let's scroll down. Right here. It always takes a second to find that one. at the beginning, just do a backspace or a delete on that pound sign to uncomment it. Then we're gonna Control O and enter to save that, and then Control X to exit. Now it's time to get the WireGuard aspect set up. Before we do that though, we need to change the permissions to the WireGuard's path. So let's go ahead and type sudo chmod go plus rx, and then the path to the WireGuard folder, which is etc/WireGuard. Type your password, then navigate to the folder. Let's do cd/etc/WireGuard. Then we're gonna run umasq 077. So now if we type umasq-p, we can see that we're in good shape. So let's clear that screen. And the next thing we need to do is download our VPN configuration file from our WireGuard provider. Now once you reach this point, you'll want to go ahead and choose a WireGuard provider. There are any number of VPN providers now that support WireGuard. However, there's only a handful, as you can see notated here in the Unraid forums, that actually support downloading WireGuard configuration files. So I've chosen to go ahead and use Mullvad as my provider. One of the unique things about Mullvad is that they actually have a billing that is a little bit more like a parking meter. You just kind of add time and increase the date that you're paid up until. They take any number of payment methods, credit cards, PayPal, Bitcoin, etc. So once you decide on a provider, if you're not using Mullvad, then you'll have to sort out how to download your configuration files. But if you are using Mullvad, then you can go ahead and follow along with me here. So I've already created an account. It's really straightforward. Once you get signed in and have created an account, come to the My Account page. And once you're here, it almost doesn't even look like a link, but it is. You can click this button right here, Manage Ports and WireGuard Keys. Then once you get to this page, you'll see a link right here that says Create a WireGuard configuration file. So let's click on that. And we're going to be using this on the Linux platform. We're going to generate a key right here. Then we can select a country. I'm going to go ahead and use the US, and then I'm going to go with Seattle, and then you can select any available server that's on offer. We're not going to go into the advanced settings. We're just going to do download file, and I'm going to save that to the desktop. Then let's go ahead and open up this download in a text editor and make one small change. Right here on the allowed IPs line, we want to take out 0/0:: and the comma. Then we're going to copy and paste this over onto our terminal like so. Let's highlight all that. Copy. Then come back to our terminal window. Then let's come back over here to the terminal, and making sure that you're in the etc. WireGuard directory, we're going to type sudo nano wg0.conf. Then you're going to hit Command V on your keyboard to paste that in. Once you get it pasted in, we're going to do Control O to save and Control X. So now if we type ls to list the files in the directory, we can see the wgo.conf WireGuard configuration file. Now if you remember, we can type IP space A to see our network configuration, and there's our ENP1S0 that I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the video. So let's go ahead and bring up the WireGuard tunnel by typing wg-quick up wg0. All right. Now if we type IPA again, we can see the third option right here. There's our WireGuard tunnel. It's up and looks like it's running just fine. Now what we want is for this tunnel to come up every time the VM boots up. We don't want to have to turn our VM on and then have to log in and type that command in every time. So let's go ahead and enable this to bring the tunnel up once we boot. We can do that by typing sudo systemctl enable wg quick at wg0. Now we can go ahead and reboot the VM for these changes to take effect. So let's type sudo reboot, and I will see you after this restarts. Okay, now to log back in as SSH, we're gonna do SSH. In my case, it's Chaz at 192.168.1.130. Password. We're all logged in there, so let's clear the screen. And now let's check to see if our tunnel came up like it was supposed to by typing IP space A. And there it is. There's our third network interface. The tunnel came up just like it was supposed to. Looks like we are in good shape. Now if you want to check that the IP address is matching that of your VPN provider, you can type curl ifconfig.io and 198.54.131.122 is the IP address of the Mulvad VPN server. So everything is working almost the way it should be. Now we just have a few more steps to get our IP tables set up and we'll be off to the races. Now in the description below, I've included a link to a Google Drive folder that's going to have this text document with all these IP tables in it. I took the IP tables that Spaceinvader gave us in his original video and I modified them to fit our purposes here for the Wireguard VPN. Now one of the things that you're going to have to do on your part before you copy and paste this into the terminal is you're going to have to make some changes. So if you'll read this line right here, I've written the IP tables, paste all this into a text editor, and change the interface to match ENPXS0. There are 6 to change, and what I'm talking about is right here. So if you remember back to the beginning of the video where we looked at the label on the interface, you can see on mine it's ENP1S0. Chances are yours is also going to say ENP1S0, but if it doesn't, if it says ENP2 or ENP3, etc., then you'll need to modify these in the IP tables. So there's 1 here, 2 here, 3 here, 4 here, 5 here, 6 and 7 here. So change these to match your specific label. So in my case, it's ENP1S0, so I'm just gonna leave these how they are. And before I copy and paste, actually I'll go ahead and copy these. Let's go ahead and copy these right here. Command C on our keyboard. And then over here on our terminal, let's go ahead and type sudo -s, and then put our password in. That's gonna log us in as root here for a second. Now we're gonna hit Command V on the keyboard. Enter. Okay. Now we can type exit. And just to verify that we are out of root, go ahead and type womi. And you can see that the user there is Chaz. So we're back where we want to be. So let's go ahead and save these rules. We're going to do sudo netfilter, netfilter -persistent space save. Now let's go ahead and clear the screen. And now that we've saved those rules, we need to apply them to the system startup. So type systemctl enable net filter persistent. You'll have to type your password in here a few times. Okay, let's clear the screen again. And we'll get ready to do a little prep work for our DNSMasq installation. So let's go ahead and navigate to our etc systemd folder by typing cd /etc /systemd, and then list the files. And the one we're going to edit is resolved.conf. So let's do sudo nano resolved.conf. And if we scroll down to the second to last line, press delete to uncomment this line, the DNS stub listener, and we're going to change this to no. And let's do Control O to save, Control X. Now we're ready to install DNSMasq. So type sudo apt-get install DNSMasq. Yes. So let's clear the screen here, and we need to set DNSMasq to start on boot. So type systemctl start DNSMasq. Now we're ready to do a reboot, so let's go ahead and type sudo reboot, and I'll catch you after we log back in. Now that we've logged back in, let's type dig debian.org at localhost. And you should get something similar to this to verify that it's working. If it's not working, this will hang for a few minutes and then you'll see some errors. And to double check that DNSMasq is controlling port 53, we also want to type sudo lsof space I space hyphen capital P space hyphen N separator grep space list. And on the bottom two lines there, you should see where it says DNSMasq. It's controlling our port 53 for the IPv4 and IPv6. We're not utilizing IPv6, so that one's kind of irrelevant, but the IPv4 is mainly what we're looking at. So that tells us that we've got our IP tables set up. It tells us that our DNSMasq is working the way that it's supposed to, and our server should be ready to go. Now, if you ran the digdebian.org command and it returned an error, then the chances are you made a mistake when you were entering the IP tables. And the best way to double check that is to type sudo IPTables -S password, and it'll list all those IP tables out for you that we entered earlier. So double check that you've got all of the ENP1S zeros replaced. Remember there's 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And like I said, if you've got an error, come back and give those a double check. Make sure you don't have anything going on there. And at this point, our server, our VPN VM, should be completely ready to go. So now we're going to open up our network settings here on our computer and change it over to the IP address of the VM here and double check our network. So let's give that a go. Now here on my network settings, I'm going to come over to Advanced, and I'm going to change the router to 192.168.1.137. You can remember that's the IP address of my particular VM VPN. And then I'm going to change the DNS to the same address, .137. Hit apply. And then we can open up a web browser to verify that we don't have any DNS leaks and that our IP address has changed. So one of my favorites is ipleak.net. If you go there, it immediately starts running all the tests. You'll notice right here, there's my IP address of this machine. And it's showing me in Washington, which is, if you remember earlier, correct. I selected a server in Seattle. I've got no DNS leaks. And this also has a convenient torrent activation. I won't go into that here, but for anybody that uses torrents, you want to double check that your torrent is returning the correct address. You can use that here. And we are in good shape. Now I'm going to open up speedtest.net and run a quick speed test. Before, on the Openvpn virtual router, I would get roughly 50 to 60 megabytes on a server that was close to me here in Texas. Now this one being all the way in Seattle and on Wireguard, you can see a significant improvement over 50 to 60 megabytes. Now there's a lot of things that affect your speed. It's going to be your hardware, your network connection, the location of your VPN server, the location of your speed test server. So this isn't a blanket performance increase, but you should see some significant improvements over the Openvpn protocol. Now real quick, as a bonus for anybody that's running Pi-hole, if you want your Pi-hole to resolve through the VPN VM so that you can still reduce any DNS leaks but block the ads on your network, then all you have to do is go to Settings, DNS, and make sure you unclick any preloaded DNS servers. Come over here to Custom and enter the IP address of your VPN router. So let's do, for this one, it was .137. I'll hit save there. And so now, if I come back onto my network settings for my computer, and I point my DNS server and run it through Pi-hole, hit OK and apply, I can go back to speedtest.net and watch it block the ads. You'll notice a huge difference. I'm not using the browser ad blocker. I'm just relying solely on Pi-hole, and it's blocking all of these ads that usually populate here. I'll run one more quick speed test just to see how well it does. Almost 200 megs. That's awesome. Alright, well that's gonna do it for this video. I know it was a bit longer than usual, but I wanted to be thorough going through the steps, especially for anyone that may have been setting up something like this for the first time. If you're using a VPN provider with limited active connections, or for devices in your house that you want to run through a VPN that lack the native ability to do so, I hope you found this information helpful. We've got some cool stuff coming to the channel soon. Next up, we'll be covering the latest update of one of my favorite containers and media compressor, Unmask, in detail with how-tos on all the new features. So if you're new to the channel, don't forget to like and subscribe, and a quick thank you to all my Patreon supporters. And until next time, have a great day.